Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Discipline Agile Play What Happens When You Play and Work Less in an Agile Enterprise webinar by Klaus Boedker. Klaus is a certified discipline agile coach and a certified discipline agile instructor and a first-time presenter for our membership webinars. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the question box and Klaus will address them once his presentation is done. And then by attending this webinar, I will credit your profile with 1 hour of certification after the webinar. Thank you very much. Enjoy the webinar.
All right, thank you, Pam, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We are going to spend the next hour roughly to talk about discipline play and what happens when you play more and work less in the Agile Enterprise. All right, so let's get started. There we go. All right. So my name is Klaus. I am an Agile coach with Scott Ambler and Associates. Even though my name sounds Germanic, I am really from Denmark, and this is where I was born and grew up, and this is where I went to school, getting a master's in political science. These are my favorite running shoes. And here are some of my favorite places to run. This is up in the mountains in Vancouver. I'm a sucker for really good coffee and really good sushi. I also love photography. So when I'm not working, I like to get out and take some pictures. And here's some of the photos I've taken over the years. This is from Greenland, and this is from Tanzania, and this is from British Columbia. This is the car that I drive to fit 2 of these in the back. And this is the car I would like to drive when my kids get old enough to drive themselves. I'm a big believer in continuous improvement and servant leadership, or to paraphrase John F. Kennedy, ask not what your team can do for you, ask what you can do for your team. All right, so that was a very brief introduction about me. So let's get on to the play. So the first, let's look at this picture here, and let's pause for a moment and pondering the question: what words would you describe when you see this, or what words would you use to describe this picture when you see this picture? So it could be words like could be playful, it could be fun, happy, laughter, energized, excited, cheerful, and optimistic. And these are some of the characteristics that we see when people play more. And what we're gonna cover here over the next roughly hour is how do we get more play into work, and especially how do we get more play into the Agile Enterprise, and where are those intersects where we can introduce those playful elements. All right, so let's start off with a couple more questions. So take a moment to think about this question here. So the question is, what is the single most important competency for CEOs to have in order to navigate an increasingly complex world? So here's some options. Is it, I'm gonna move this a little bit out of the way. Is it communication? Is it multitasking? Is it creativity? Or is it all of the above? So just take a couple seconds to ponder that, and I will reveal the answer now. It is creativity. And don't take my word for it. This was actually done in a survey by IBM back in 2010, where they surveyed 1,500 CEOs about what skills they needed to navigate this increasingly complex world, and creativity came out top. All right, next question. So thinking back to your childhood, would you say that you are more creative today, the same, or less creative? So again, just take a couple of seconds to think about that. So again, this being sort of a one-way communication, I obviously can't hear your answers. Here I can share some data though, and this particular set of data is from the Lego Foundation, where they collected the data that's been conducted over the many past years about creative thinking scores. And what the data shows, the pattern it shows, is that we have this huge drop off in our creativity once we hit that 8, 10 years, and especially when we get in our teenage years and adolescence, no one, or very low percentage, we're talking about 2-3%, identify themselves as being really creative. So that's some interesting data right there. All right, next question. When was the last time that you played? So again, take a couple of seconds to think about that. And again, I can't hear your answers, but what I, just the patterns I see, the people I speak with as an Agile coach, the teams that I work with, it was probably quite a while ago. All right, so let's talk about what is play really. Let's talk about that for a moment. So, and to phrase it, let's look at a handful of quotes that talks about play. So the first one here is from Abraham Maslow, and he talks about that. He says that almost all creativity involves purposeful play. So that's an interesting quote, and we'll talk more about what is purposeful play and what is disciplined play. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But he sees that clear link between creativity and between play. There's a quote here by Diane Ackerman. She says that play is the brain's favorite way of learning, and I can certainly identify with that. When you teach, when you train new concepts or refreshing old concepts, when you have a chance to incorporate play, it is the preferable way of the brain to learn, and learning just becomes more fun. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, and hopefully also through this a little bit more playful webinar, maybe you will see there's some more of the concepts that stick, because play is a great way of learning. Albert Einstein said that play is the highest form of research. I like this quote as well, especially coming from him. As a scientist and obviously doing lots of research, and he was able to introduce play and playful elements into his research and the experimentation. So that also, I think that's a really interesting quote there, tying the link between experimentation, between research, and then also play. Here's one by me. You cannot hide in play. And I inserted this in the most humble way possible, because there's obviously some very famous people there. So in the most humble, my most humble contribution is that you cannot hide in play. And what this means is, so having done this for a while, what I found is when you take a playful approach to work and to the elements within work, what ends up happening is that you're not, the participants you play with, they have some ideas, some thoughts that they're not really sure if they're okay sharing them. And then what ends up happening is that in play, it actually ends up coming out after all. So that I find that really, really interesting. And I'll give you an example. So I did a play activity a couple of years ago with other Agilists or some other Agile coaches, and one of the coaches was having a hard time with too much personal work in progress, and he didn't really go into this activity wanting to share it. But what ended up happening is that through this playful activity, he ended up sharing that story about having too much WIP, and then afterwards during the debrief, he's like, "Wow, I never really intended to share that, but I guess it just sort of came out through this playful activity." All right, last one. So this is by Stuart Brown. He's the author of a book called Play. And the way he summarizes play is that it energizes us, it enlivens us, it eases our burdens, it renews our natural sense of optimism, and it opens us up to new possibilities. So a very nice quote, and a very sort of saying quote, telling quote about what can really happen when we start to play more. Okay, so let's look at play, and let's look at how we can start to categorize play. What are the different types of play? So you can put play on a scale. On the one end of the scale, you have more structured play, and this is where there are lots of rules that you have to follow. Sport being some primary examples of very structured play. Golf has golf, basketball, football, badminton, soccer. They all have set rules, and when you play them, you can't really alter the rule unless, of course, you agree to alter the rules before you start the play. And then on the other end of the scale, we have completely unstructured play. And that's typically when we think about children playing, this very free-form playing. They just sort of start playing without really having the rules in place. And then maybe as the play evolves and it unfolds, they make up some of the rules as they go along, and then they sort of move along the scale, so it becomes a little bit more structured, maybe, and not completely towards the other end of the scale. So when we do play at work and play in an agile setting, well, what I like to find the sweet spot between something that's structured and unstructured. So it's still free form. It still allows for, there's still some flexibility built in, and yet there are a few, 2, 3, 4 set rules from the beginning, that so everyone knows how to play the game. So I like to find that sweet spot between structured and unstructured play. So let's talk about what is disciplined play. So another way to paraphrase that, it is play with a purpose. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we don't just pick up. It's not just picking up 2 ping pong bats and start playing ping pong. That's play and it's fun. Yet it doesn't have a grander purpose. So what you'll see here, the examples of play that we're going to go through, is that they all have purpose. It's purposeful play or disciplined play. So the various purpose can be to help learn something new, help move along when we do when we need to do brainstorming. It can be that we need to come up with a new vision for the team or for the company, or sort of strengthen that for the project. So there is an underlying purpose and an underlying sort of activity. What we then end up doing is that we make that activity more playful. We add some playful elements to those activities. And then the play suddenly has a purpose. So that's what disciplined play is. It's play with a purpose. You may have heard another term for this if you come across it. And the purposeful play is sometimes called serious play. Again, just to underline that it's not just play for the sake of play. It's play with a purpose, or it's serious play. All right. So let's briefly talk about what Agile is. So Agile, obviously, it's a lot of different things. Some of the things to highlight here that ties in with what we're going to talk about today with the play is that, well, Agile is very focused on building high-performing teams. Agile is also focused on building the right products. And not only that, but also building the right product the right way in the right amount of time. And then yet again, another focus of Agile is to gain that competitive advantage that helps us better deal with change and disruptions that we see in the world today and in the business world today. So that's very briefly on what Agile is. So let's then ask the question: well, how does Agile and play? How do they intersect? Where do they intersect? Let's look at that. All right. So as members of DA, this is you have most likely seen this before. So here are the different phases. So we have inception. We'll just focus on it today. We'll just focus on inception, construction, transition, and then you can sort of say we can also put it all together when we're going to look at some ongoing goals. So let's dive into inception first. All right. So within inception, we have a goal of develop a common vision. And if you go into the goal diagram and you look at some of the points that are highlighted and that are bolded and italicized, what do we find? So under this develop, what are some of those good practices and better practices in there? So just going from the bottom in terms of communicating that vision while having information radiators, as in something that's really visual, is a really good idea. Formality, statement of intent, level of agreement, general agreement is oftentimes a better choice here. Level of detail, we keep it lightweight. How do we capture the vision? We want some sort of vision statement or expected outcome. And how do we get there? Well, collaborative is a really good way of getting there. So how we normally approach vision is like this. It's with paper and pencil and markers. So it's very flat. It's very one-dimensional. And when you approach creating that common vision, and your aspiration is to get through these or hit these bold and italicized points. It's collaborative, it's lightweight, we get to general agreement and so on and so forth, and it's visual. That can be really challenging on using just paper and pen. So what if it looked like this? What if we approach the creating that common vision this way, in a playful way, using Lego? So this is an example of where a team comes together, and you can sort of see that it's very different. I mean, we could have taken a picture of people developing a vision, and it would most likely be someone sitting and writing it first at their desktop or at their desk, and then afterwards, maybe it would be a presentation, and then you'd have one person speaking, and then the rest would sort of sit around the room and listen to that. That's how visions often are developed when you use paper and pen. Using Lego, you see it's a very different picture here. It's a very different scenario. You see everyone around the table, they're leaning in, everyone has their hands out, everyone can build on the model, and literally this is what it ends up looking like. Literally, what ends up happening in the end is that everyone has their own piece on that model. And I mean that in a both metaphorical sense and a very literal sense, because when we build shared models and shared visions using Lego, one of the rules is that everyone must have some sort of piece, some sort of element in the shared vision that's yours, that you built. So that's one way. So here's one type of play, one way of injecting play into Agile and into the inception phase. All right. So moving into the construction phase, let's look at that for a moment. First, let's look at the goal around producing a potentially consumable solution. And specifically in there, let's look at the exploring stakeholder needs and also exploring solution design. So as you'll see in there, in these goal diagrams, what you'll see there is that we have something around look at modeling, backlog refinement, just-in-time model storming, basically people coming together. A group of people, it could be the full team, it could be a subset of the team, yet it's always more than one. And it is also what happens when multiple people come together? Well, they obviously come together with their own sort of view of the world and their own viewpoint and sort of their own way of interpreting things and their own ideas and their own expertise. So basically, it's a set of diverse people coming together with the intent of producing something collaboratively. All right, so let's look at what are some ways we can add playful elements to those activities. All right, so very quickly, the first game of the morning. So take a moment, take 20 seconds to add up these numbers. Just go ahead and add them up, however you want to do that. All right, so the point of this game is to illustrate what we call cognitive empathy. So with this number sequence, what you may have, after you added them up, maybe went back and added them up differently. Not because you were like, well, did I get the right number? But because maybe you saw there were different patterns of how you could add them up. So some people would go 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 + 5 + 6 + 7 + 8 + 9, 10. Some might also see, wow, there's a 10 there, and if I add the 1 and 9, I get 10, and 2 and 8, I get 10, and 3 and 7, I get 10, so on and so forth. Some may add it up going backwards into the sequence of 10 + 9 + 8 + 7, whatever it may be. There are lots and lots of different ways of adding up this number sequence. And what the point here is, it doesn't really matter how you added it up. We all saw the different patterns, and we all wanted to add it up differently. What this quick game illustrates is what we call cognitive empathy, which means that we are able to empathize. So when you talk about empathy, normally we talk about emotional empathy. So this is different. This is cognitive empathy. So this is empathy for how people in your team, in that group that you're working with, how do they think? How do they approach this situation? And this quick game, and there are others, and now there are other games around this, quickly can illustrate that everyone brings a different mind to this table, and everyone brings a different perspective, and that can end up being a really, really good thing. And it can also help us when we strengthen that cognitive empathy and just shine a light on it through this very quick game before we start look ahead modeling or just in time model storming or backlog refinement. It can sort of say, oh, it sort of makes everyone pause up and say, oh yeah, you are right. We do bring different perspectives, and that's actually a really good thing. So when we don't necessarily agree on something, that's really because, well, we bring different perspectives. And by strengthening our cognitive empathy, we're able to empathize more with with other people's viewpoints. And generally speaking, the session will go along more smoothly. All right, so here's another small game that illustrates or that you can ingest into those type of activities like look ahead modeling, backlog refinement, so on and so forth. So this is a game. This is called the game of opposites. So the game very quickly is that if you find yourself in backlog refinement, you're discussing a certain story and you can't really agree. Is this a 3 or is it an 8? And you've done a couple of votes in your planning poker, you talked about it, and you haven't really gotten any further. So what you can quickly do is you can add a playful element, and that playful element is you play the game of opposite, where you have to. So first you have to physically take each other's seats, because that gets you moving and sort of gets the blood flowing, and you get a little bit re-energized. And then you have to defend each other's positions. So if you said it was an 8, you have to go take the other person's seat that said it was a 3, and then you have to speak from their perspective, saying, "Oh yeah, it's totally a 3 because so and so and so," and the other person has to go over in your seat, and they have to take your perspective and defend why this is an 8. And then through that playful interaction, you may be able to get a little bit closer to each other and say, "Oh, you know what? Either we still can't, we still can't agree, but at least we had a little bit of fun with it." Or maybe you get a little bit closer and then you end up saying, well, it really is an 8, or maybe it's a 5, whatever it may be. Again, just another quick playful element you can just throw into to those types of collaborative activities like backlog refinement, model storming, look ahead modeling, so on and so forth. All right. So again, staying with construction. So in construction, let's just quickly look at this principle from the Discipline Agile Manifesto. So the principle reads that at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So what most people use, the practice is that most people carry this into this principle into is the retrospective. So retrospectives are a really good place to add playful elements and to add games, because that it comes back to the point in the beginning, or the quote in the beginning, that said you cannot hide and play. And so when you take this more playful approach, other than just the sort of plain old asking people around the table, what went well, what didn't go well, when you make it more playful, you actually end up extracting and getting better feedback and more valuable feedback that you can then take and discuss and turn into action items. So one of the games that I like to play, start off the retrospective with, is called Kudos Cards. Kudos Cards. So these are from Management 3.0, and you can, if you just look up Kudos Card Management 3.0, you will find these, and they're templates you can print out and cut out and then use these. You don't have to buy the cards. So this is a really fun way of starting a retrospective, and really all it is you taking 5 minutes. You have a lot of these cards in the room. You have some Sharpies. They're laid out on the table, and you just ask the question. Okay, so now I'd like everyone to pick up, 1, 2, 3 cards, and then write down someone you want to say thank you to. Looking back at the past iteration, it could be one person, it could be the whole team, it could be someone outside the team, just anyone you want to say thank you. You're creating sort of this positive environment, reinforcing environment, and you're also because afterwards people have read it and they have written it down. You ask them to read it out loud. So what that also does is that creates psychological safety, that you're able to hear your own voice within the room, and it's safe to speak up. So fun way of starting out the retrospective. So moving into gathering the feedback and discussing the feedback and discussing what are we going to do with, how are we going to distill action items from this. So another favorite game of mine during retrospective is the sailboat game. It's fun because I get to draw a sailboat every time. So obviously this is not my drawing, this is a photo of a sailboat, but if it were retrospective, I would draw a sailboat on the whiteboard. So what does this game consist of? It consists of you asking people, first of all, well, let's look at the sail. So write down on sticky notes, what made us go faster in the past 2 weeks? It also looks at anchors. What has slowed us down in the past 2 weeks? So write that down on sticky notes and put it up on the whiteboard where the anchor is. And also looking ahead, what are some of the icebergs that you see? What are some of the risks that you see on the horizon? So you end up with this really rich feedback that's not just one-dimensional. And people were able to tie some metaphors to it. The sails, like, oh, okay, what did make us go faster? And the anchor and iceberg. And again, by tying metaphors to it and making it a little bit more playful, you end up getting, oftentimes, you end up getting richer feedback that way and richer ideas. So a really fun game to play. All right, so again, staying in construction, let's look at addressing changing stakeholder need. And specifically, let's look at the point around prioritizing the work. So imagine that you had a group of product owners and they were just, they hadn't really nailed down this sort of art/science of prioritizing the backlog. And maybe because there's a group of product owners, they are, they're competing business priorities and it's complicated. People, the different business areas are always saying, well, mine's more important, and they can't really figure it out. So what's one way you could help them get better at this? Well, you could run a short session, a short sort of skill building session with these product owners about how to prioritize the backlog, how to prioritize the work. So one way of doing that, one playful element you could add to that is you could add something that's called, a game that's called Celebrity Rescue. So what Celebrity Rescue is, really fun game. What you have to do, you have to find about 15 currently living celebrities. And it's always a good thing to find someone that's a little bit controversial. So here's just a small sample size. Not that everyone in there is controversial, but you have Bill Gates, you have Justin Bieber, you have Anderson from CNN, and you have the princess. And then what you then do is you lay out these 15 celebrities, and getting a good mix of male, female, controversial, not that controversial. And then you tell the team, well, you can't. So what you have to do is, so the scenario is that the cruise ship they're on is sinking, and you have to then rescue them. So again, you have these 15 pictures of different celebrities. You have to rescue these celebrities, but you cannot rescue them unless you agree on the order as a team. So you can play this through different iterations. I often play this in like 2 or 3. I play it in 2 or 3 rounds. Because in the beginning, you give them a time limit. You say you have 8 minutes to do this. And so there's lots of discussion about, who should we say first? Should we say women and children first, or people who's contributed a lot to society, or young people, or whatever it may be? And there's always someone that no one really likes to save. So we're not going to rescue that person. There's what also oftentimes happens is some people will not know who this celebrity is. And then as a group, then you help each other out, saying, oh, no, it's this person, which you can then use to debrief with that. It's really hard to prioritize work if you don't know the value of it, if you don't fully understand it. So there's lots and lots of good sort of debrief points in there. And by playing it over several rounds, what usually ends up happening in the end is that the team develops this algorithm or this formula, this logic for how are we going to rank our work. And that you can use that to illustrate the point of, well, for our own backlog, what is the formula? What is the algorithm we can develop there to make that work easier? So again, just a playful element you can insert into skill building to help your group of product owners to become better at prioritizing the work. All right, so let's look at an ongoing goal. So an ongoing goal is under grow team members and under sustain team. What are some different ways we can do that, and what are some different ways we can add playful elements to sustaining and growing the team as an ongoing goal? All right, so very quickly, this gentleman is called Bruce Tuckman, and he has developed what's called, surprisingly, the Tuckman model, also known as the forming, storming, norming, and performing. So let me just very briefly just describe that model and how we can add playful elements to that. So on the one axis, you have team interrelatedness, team spirit, team morale, and then on the other axis, you have how well do we solve problems as a team. All right, and I see there's a typo there. Whoops. So let's first look. So the first point here is form. So the team gets together, and people are excited about the work ahead. There's not a lot of conflict. They're sort of generally getting along. Just sort of general excitement, but also some questions about, well, how are we going to do this? What is the work really? Not really sure. So that's sort of where that's where they often start. And then we move to storming, and it's called that because it feels like a storming phase. So that's where you see we go down on the x-axis on the team interrelatedness and sort of team morale, team spirit, because that's the conflict portion. That's where we're really trying to figure things out, both in terms of who are these people that I'm now going to be working with for the next 6 months, for the next year. You know, who's really in charge here? What's my role here? How do I fit in? The work, I'm not sure I agree on that we're going to do it this way or that way. So it generally feels stormy. And then you move out of that, things start to normalize, and finally, over time, if you're able to, you can grow and mature into this performing state where you get along really well and you solve problems together as a team really, really well. All right, so let's look. So where are some? So the point with this model that Bruce Tuckman made is that all teams go through this model. You can't just skip a stage. You can't say, well, I don't really like the storming. Can we just skip that? It doesn't work that way. You have to go through that. The team has to pass through this journey. The point being here, and this is where it comes tying back to that ongoing goal of sustaining the team and growing the team, is as a manager, as a leader, as a team lead, whatever your role is, if you have the ability to help the team along and sort of pass through this journey more quickly. And one of the ways you can do that is to look at the axis on team interrelatedness, team spirit, team morale. What can I do there? And how can we add some playful elements? So that axis really is all about how do we get to know each other better as human beings. So in that you have, there's a game that I really enjoy playing. It's called Pecha Kucha. So that's Japanese for chit chat. And this game came about in Japan by a design firm arranged these evenings they call Pecha Kucha evenings, where you would put together a sort of a micro portfolio of your design work, and then it would put together in a PowerPoint, and then each slide would be paced at, say, 20 seconds, and you'd have a maximum number there to, beforehand they would agree how many slides you could have, let's say 20 slides. They'd agree on the cadence of each slide, so each slide would be set to 20 seconds. And then the idea was that you would just have your work in there. You just have pictures, no text. And then you would talk for 20 seconds while that slide was in your back, was behind you. And then it would automatically shift to the next one, and you talk for 20 seconds about that. And then you would go through, and then very quickly, in the span of 4, 5, 6 minutes, you were able to tell the story about your design portfolio. So someone took that and said, well, that's a really good format. Can we turn this into sort of a team game, a team activity? And it did. It ended up, it could be turned into that. So the way that I play Pecha Kucha is I play it with teams, and then I give them a template, and again, let's say it's 20 slides, or maybe it's just 15, and they're paced again at 15 or 20 seconds. That you can play around with. We'll get to that in a moment. And then the simple rule is that it can only be pictures and no text, and it can only be about you. It cannot be about work. And then so they put that together, and then they get a chance to come up in front of the whole team, and then they get to talk about themselves, whatever the personal story is. It could be about their dog, their cat, you know, how they celebrate Christmas, where they grew up, where they went to school, what they do today, a favorite hiking trip, they collect Pokemon, whatever it may be. The point is that you end up telling this personal story, and everyone listens to it. Everyone tells their own story, and then you end up going up. You know, that helps you understand each other better as people, as human beings, and that's a really good way of going along that axis of building that team interrelatedness, team spirit, team morale. So you did actually see an example of Pitcha Kucha in the beginning. That was how I chose to introduce myself. I mainly spoke about, there was a couple of points about work. I sort of had to sneak that in there so you knew how I work from a professional standpoint. But mainly it was about me as a person. And again, so the point here is that that was one way of doing this Pitcha Kucha. You could do it another way. You can play around with the format that suits your team and the situation best. You could choose, 20 slides timed at 20 seconds each. If you have a really big team, well, that's gonna take that may not take too long. So you could choose just 10 slides, timed at 20 seconds each or 15 seconds each. You sort of have to play around with the format that just suits your team and the situation the best. All right. So starting to wrap up here. So let's ask the question: what actually happens when you play more? All right, let's look at that. So first of all, we have fun and we laugh together. And what does that mean? Well, that means that from a brain standpoint, you get a squirt of endorphins and oxytocin. So what happens when we laugh is that the brain releases this chemical, endorphins, and it makes us feel good. What also happens with most types of play is that you get to feel part of something bigger. You get to feel part of the group. And that your brain then releases oxytocin, which again feels really good. And you have that sense of belonging. That in hand lowers the stress and the anxiety. So workplaces oftentimes, not intentionally, unintentionally, can oftentimes be stressful. We have too much work, we have too little time or too few hands to do the work. It could also be really complicated or even complex work that we do. Maybe the people that are on a team, we don't really get along with all of them. Maybe you have a long commute to work. Maybe there are other people that you don't get along with, so in general, work today, not intentionally, unintentionally, can sometimes be stressful and can sometimes can make you anxious. And then by introducing more play, because we laugh, because we have fun, well, when you add these playful elements, it lowers the stress and the anxiety. Because another point here from a neuroscience standpoint is that it is physically impossible for the brain to be both in a playful state, as in laughing, having fun, and being in a stressful, anxious state. It's just not possible. So what you'll see with a group, and you may even experience yourself, if you go into a meeting feeling a little bit stressed, a little bit anxious, and if you end up taking some playful approaches, your facilitator ends up taking some playful approaches to what you do in the meeting, you will probably notice that your stress and anxiety will start to go down, simply because the brain cannot be in a stress state and a playful state at the same time. So what else ended up happening? Because we laugh more, because we have more fun, because we get some happy chemicals released by the brain, and because our stress levels and anxiety levels start to go down, conversations and interactions start to feel less risky. So if there actually were something you went to this meeting and you were feeling a bit, maybe a bit stressed about, maybe a bit anxious about, I'm not really sure if I want to bring this up, because if you take a playful approach and it lightens the mood and makes it feel more fun, more optimistic, a little bit more lightweight, maybe, just maybe, you have the courage then to say, oh, okay, let's also talk about this. I wasn't really going to bring it up, but because we're having fun, I'll bring it up now. So those sort of those harder topics, more difficult topics that feels more risky, they become easier to talk about. And also because depends on how you design the play, but if you design the play around using metaphors or using some sort of toys or play elements, so Lego or pictures or Play-Doh, whatever it may be, pipe cleaners, then the risky and the dangerous stuff is not about you anymore. It's about what you create. So it's about these optics that are on the table now. The Lego, the Play-Doh, the pipe cleaners, the pictures. You're putting the meaning into them, and it's not really. I mean, you're saying it, but the meaning is really on the table. So again, that lowers that sort of risk level of talking about that. So all of that sort of put together ends up or results in that we lean in more and not out, because we have fun, because we laugh, because we play, because it becomes the stress levels, anxiety levels go down a little bit, and because difficult conversation becomes less risky, we end up leaning in more, and everyone ends up taking a bigger part in what's going on, and there's less sort of this leaning out and saying, I'm not taking part of it. There's less disengagement and there's more engagement. Another, a really, really clear example of that is if you think back to the developing the common vision, how that's most often done is you have someone, a couple of people putting together, using pen and paper or PowerPoint and using text in PowerPoint, and then they'll end up presenting it. So there'll be one or two people at the front talking, and everyone else is sitting around the table. And they're probably at some point after 5-10 minutes, they're probably, unless they're being actively engaged, they're probably going to check out and start being productive in Outlook or on their phones or whatever it may be. Think about what's for lunch. That's that leaning out element. When you design it differently in a more playful way, using Lego or some other elements to build your shared vision, people start to lean in because you can't not take part of it, and you naturally want to take part of it because it's fun, it's playful. So more leaning in, less leaning out, more engagement, less disengagement is another clear benefit of adding more play. We also end up strengthening our social bonds when we play. And if you think back to a very clear example of this, thinking back to our childhood, is that one of the ways that we learned to get along as kids, either your brothers or sisters or friends in the street or friends at school, was through play. Play taught you to get along. And the same thing, we see the same thing happening when we introduce play at work, in a work element, that it helps us get along, and it strengthens those social bonds when we play together. That also means that at the same time, play also helps us strengthen our empathy and our trust in others. So it's a really remarkable aspect of play, that something as simple as play can help you strengthen something as complex as empathy and as trust. But by those elements that we covered, that it's safe to lean in, I don't need to lean out, I really want to be part of this, we're having fun, we're laughing, we're sort of all in this together. Through that, we end up strengthening empathy for each other. We're able to sort of, as this picture or this icon is meant to illustrate, we're able to walk in each other's shoes, and also we're able to strengthen and continue to build trust within the team, within that setting. Also, what ends up happening is we uncover more creative and more innovative ideas through play. And going back to the quote around how play and creativity is tied together, and how play and research is tied together, that's another benefit of adding more play. We open up for that. We end up encouraging people to be more creative, and through that creativity, through strengthening the trust, the empathy, lowering the sort of the risk level, making it more safe, you end up coming out with or sharing these ideas that you didn't necessarily mean to share, because that's too out there. I'm not going to share that. I'm just going to be, people are going to laugh at me, either out openly or behind my back. And by having more, by taking a more playful approach, you start to strengthen that empathy, emotional and cognitive empathy, And so people start sharing all these more creative and innovative ideas. And finally, learning sticks better. So again, going back to the quote about the brain, sort of play being the brain's favorite way of learning. There is clear research that shows that when you take a more playful element to learning, it sticks better for lots of different reasons. Both because it's more memorable, also because oftentimes in play you end up using your hands a lot, be it Lego, Play-Doh, pipe cleaners, whatever it is. And there's a really strong connection by using your hands and sort of storing that learning in your brain. So overall, learning sticks better. All right, so we're coming up on the 45-minute mark. So let's end up with a quick game, surprisingly. We're going to play a quick game of true and false. And again, I can't obviously hear answers, so you're just going to have to take a couple of seconds on your end to think whether the statement is true or false. And then after that, then we have just a couple of notes on upcoming webinars and training from the Discipline Agile Consortium, and then we end up with Q&A. And I'm going to see if I can figure that out if there are any questions. All right, so here we go. So first question, true or false? Among leadership, creativity is a more sought after skill than communication. So what do you think, true or false? Again, just take a couple of seconds to ponder that. So that is true, as we saw in the beginning of with the survey done by IBM, that creativity is the skill needed by leaders and CEOs to navigate an increasingly complicated and complex world. All right, next statement. We get more creative as we get older. So again, true or false? Take a couple of seconds to consider that. So that's false. The data clearly shows, and it's not just data from the last 5 years, it's data from the last 50 years, that as we get older, we lose those creative thinking skills for a number of different reasons. And that could be, almost a webinar on its own. What is behind us losing these creative thinking skills, and that this creative muscle? Why does it decline? Lots and lots of different reasons for that. The fact of the matter is that it does, which is unfortunate. So the more reason to add play into the workplace and sort of strengthen and regrow those creative skills and that creative muscle. You can insert play just about anywhere in Discipline Agile. True or false? So again, take a couple of seconds. So that's true. Again, as I've shown here, through looking at the inception phase, the construction phase, we didn't look at transition, we did look at ongoing goals, found lots of ways, and I personally use play in a handful of other places within DA to sort of just strengthen, to augment the framework around how Agile is being used out in the enterprise. All right, next statement. Play lowers stress, anxiety, and frustration. So true or false? Take a couple of seconds to consider that. That's true. Again, as we saw earlier, again, for lots of different reasons. Some of the key reasons are that when we play and have fun, our brain releases endorphins and also releases oxytocin. It becomes more safe, or it feels more safe. The psychological safety goes up, and generally speaking, we just get along better when we play, and we learn to get along better. So that lowers that stress and that anxiety and that frustration. So this is a tricky one. So play is the opposite of work. True or false? So the reason it's tricky is because so if you look at it, let me explain a sort of twofold explanation to this. So one, if you look at it from a neuroscience standpoint, play and work are not the opposite. And the answer, I'm afraid, is a little bit sad, because play and depression are the opposite. So if you do a functional MRI, what scientists have discovered is that when you're in a playful state, the opposite of that from a brain standpoint is depression, which I think is a really, really sad answer. It's not, the play is not the opposite of work. That's more a sort of a sociological answer. So it just, what's ended up happening since sort of with the Industrial Revolution and the way the scientific management and Taylorism, how work is being structured over the past 200 years, is that play has now feels like the opposite of work. And we use it a lot in language. You know, I don't have time to play right now, I have to work. That's just one example of how we use it in language. Yet it is not the opposite. It just feels that way. So that's a really good point to take away, is that they're not opposite, and they can actually be really, really well married together and dovetail together, play and work. So from my standpoint, when I play more at work, and when the teams that I coach, they play more, it feels less like we're working, because time passes more quickly. It's not as stressful. It's not as frustrating, and we just have more fun. So it feels like the opposite of work, but it is not technically the opposite. All right, last question. Last statement. I had fun today. So take a second to consider that. Again, I can't hear your answers. So again, I don't know. I hope you had fun. Yet I don't know the answer to that. And that was that took us to the end of the of discipline play, and what happens when you play more and work less in the Agile Enterprise. So thank you for playing along, and thank you for getting a little bit messy. And let's look very quickly at the webinars coming up. So we have a couple of webinars coming up. We have DevOps in the enterprise, how to become an agile business, a disciplined approach to agile transformations, and agile across all of IT. We also have some training coming up in Germany, in Victoria, Canada, Romania, Mexico City, and over in London, UK. And finally, then we have some members. This was a members only webinar. We have some more of those coming up. You can see the dates right there. There's a walkthrough of the new book that Scott and Mark are writing. Then I will turn it over to Pam for a quick poll. And then if there are some questions, we can wrap up after the poll. We can wrap up with Q&A.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to launch the poll. I'll keep it open for about 15 seconds. Okay, that ends our poll. And Klaus, if anyone has questions, please post them in the Q&A box, and Klaus will, like you said, do his best to answer them. So Klaus, we do have one question in the panel box.
Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing it. I'm clicking on Q&A.
Would you like me to read them for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Ben asks, what are the options to introduce discipline play into my organization? Bottom up and top down. It is contagious. Get playful partners.
All right. So yes, how to introduce it? It can really be. I know this. I could answer both to that. I've seen it different ways. I've seen it sort of both ways. I've seen it that you have team members or a team lead going away, or maybe attending a webinar like this, maybe attending a conference, maybe reading an article and like, oh, this is kind of cool. How can I do this? And then they find 1 or 2 or 3 quick ideas of how to do that, and then they introduce it to their team. And that would be sort of that bottom up view, which is part of the question, that it sort of just flows up, and then other teams get a note, notice that, and like, oh, this is really cool. So very, a very short story, a personal story in that regards. Every time that I've led play and especially playful activities, when there's just something about Lego. When I've led playful activities with Lego, it's not that work stops in the rest of the floor. This certainly goes on, but we do have lots of people coming by and looking in through the window in the meeting room. What are they doing in there? So you're right. It is very contagious that way. The top down, I've seen less of that. It is more, not that it can't happen. It's just I've seen less. An example of top down that I see from time to time is you have the leadership saying, well, we need to, there's some complex problems that we need to tackle. What we've tackled them sort of in a more traditional way before with pen and paper and so on and so forth. They haven't really given us the creative, innovative results we're looking for. So let's bring someone in from the outside. Let's bring in a skilled play facilitator, and then we can do it using Lego or other playful ways, and get those creative ideas, those innovative ideas that we know are there. We just haven't been able to extract them. So that would be an example of sort of a top down.
Okay, Jamie asks, how do you convince people that play is worth their valuable time?
That's a good question. So I usually don't convince them. This is the sneaky part. I usually just play. And when I say that, let me put a caveat in there that I don't. So what I don't do is I don't introduce something what you can almost call like a risky play. I don't jump something really. Yeah, I think risky is the best word. So let's say we have a group together, and what I want them to do, I want them to share. I want to build that or keep strengthening and building that interrelatedness and team spirit, team morale within a team. What I don't do is I don't just jump on, sort of spring it on them saying, you know what, and I want everyone to come up and tell, your deepest, most personal story, because we're going to share something about ourselves today. And if I did that, then most people go, I'm not doing that. So if I choose that type, so that was the pitch kucha, I will give them notice. I will meet with them a couple of weeks before that we have this session set up. I will tell them more about what is Pecha Kucha. That is really, really simple. You can completely control what you want to share. I'll give them time. I'll let them know you probably need about an hour to put that together, figure out what story you want to tell, find the right images for it. And then I'll also let them know that everyone's going to tell the story. So it's not going to be if we have a team of 10, it's not going to be 7 people and the 3 people are going to just observe and not tell the story. So again, that creates that psychological safety that, oh, okay, I guess everyone is doing it, so it's okay that I do it as well. So that's when I choose something that's more involved and more involving. I give them heads up and I sort of prepare them for it. I do sometimes spring a quick game on them. So for example, the numbers game that we played there, or the opposite games, you have to defend the opposite position of the person you can't agree with during story refinement. You have to defend their position. I will just say, hey, let's play a quick game, and then off we go. So sometimes they're convincing involved, and sometimes if it's very small, like a micro play, very low risk, I will just say, hey, we're going to do this. Let's try it out.
Okay, perfect. Corey asks, have you seen success with model storming activities in more of a play mode?
Yes. Especially when you have if you have a team where you see a pattern of people disagreeing, where you see a pattern of people having very different opinions and not always being able to get to that consensus, get to that agreement, saying, okay, I don't necessarily like it, but I can move forward with it. Let's just try it out. When you introduce a playful element there, then yes, then things generally, I've seen that's a clear example of being able to move past that and getting to that valuable, fruitful outcome that you want to get to. so you have that model you can move on with. I've also seen it, you know, even if you have a really, you know, well-functioning group, when you introduce some playful activities, I've seen that it just helps loosen up for the creativity, and helps increasing that psychological safety, and you contribute, you know, more, maybe a little bit wilder, more crazy ideas, which can, when other people build on them, can actually end up being really valuable and really useful. So I've seen the benefits there. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Richard asks, what options would you suggest work better for geographically dispersed teams?
Oh, that's a good question too, and tricky, because it's not necessarily easy to. So obviously, you can't really. What I've never done remote Lego building, for example, or remote Play-Doh, or remote pipe cleaners. That gets a little bit more involved, a little bit more tricky. What I have done though is there are online, so you can either decide. So I've either designed this myself. So for example, if I'm running a retrospective with a distributed team, I'll use Google Docs, for example, and then I'll go in, and in the Google Docs, in the presentation, the Google Doc presentation format, I will draw out there. I will draw the sailboat there, and then I will have everyone just write in that shared document. So instead of us being in the same room and the sailboat being on the whiteboard and you writing on stickies and putting it up on there, you write your notes and put them directly into that shared Google Doc. That's one way. What I've also done is there are also sites where there are some games, like that's more typically retrospective games. I think there might also be some games for. I haven't played those remotely or distributed teams. There might be some games also for other activities than just retrospective. It might be for coming up with a business canvas, or coming up with maybe even a shared model. I'm not sure about that. But there are some sites online that will let you play these games. If you can't find it, I would say just design it yourself, draw it out yourself using Google Docs or like a similar format.
Okay. And Philip asks, how do you overcome people reluctance to play?
So again, that's a really good question too. So thinking back to all the times I played, which are quite a few over the past years, I've only had one person who said, I'm not gonna play. And I think that's quite remarkable that I've only had one person over these years. So to me, the way in my experience, what my experience tells me is that it has to do with the level of play, and how risky or how complicated or complex it is, how involving it is. That when I start with a team, I will never start with something that's like really out there, where you have to build really complicated structures, or we're going to jump right into Play-Doh. They have to be comfortable with it. And I think really another way to phrase it is that whatever play challenge, because play is often phrased, it is often a challenge. The challenge is either add up the numbers 1 to 10. The challenge is also let's build a shared vision of Lego. The challenge is let's defend the opposite position. Think of sometimes plays. It's oftentimes like a playful challenge. There's a challenge in there. The key here is, when you introduce it to teams, is to pick a challenge that's low enough, or not low, but it matches their skill level, their play skill level. So again, again, going back to the pitch of Kucha and telling that personal story, if you sort of just got everyone together in a retrospect and said, surprise, you're going to get up in front of these, completely unprepared, you're going to tell a really personal story. That's picking a play challenge where the challenge is much higher, most likely, than their skill level. And what's ended up happening is you actually have the opposite effect. It makes them really frustrated, it stresses them out, it makes them anxious. So it has the complete opposite effect of what you're aiming for. So my key advice there is pick a challenge that matches the skill level you think there is in the team. Obviously, you don't always know what that skill level is, so pick something that's really low in terms of challenge to start out with, and then build it over time.
Okay, we just have one more question, and Mark is asking, in your experience, how would you handle a situation where a team member is shy and doesn't want to participate in the games?
So the way that I've done that before, when so when it's play, when the play activity involves you telling a person, you sort of participating and telling a personal story. So for example, Pitcha Kucha, one of the rules I have there is that I want everyone tells the story. There are no observers. Because when there are observers and there are people not telling the story, it changes the energy, it changes the dynamic in the room, and it doesn't, you don't get the same results in terms of sort of the room feels psychological safe, that I can actually tell my story because, oh, there's people over there sitting and watching, and so on and so forth. And also everyone is sort of leaning in. So for that, my rule is that everyone has to take part in it. And then if people say, no, I don't want to take part, then most often if it is that kind of involved play of you telling a personal story, I'll say, wow, then we're either not going to run it because I want all team members to be there, or you are free to, you're free not to take part of it. Don't take part in this event. And if you really, really don't feel comfortable doing that. If I will say though, if I uncover someone who don't want to take part in it, like for the Pitcha Kucha, then I will probably, with the team manager, the team lead, dive into, well, what's really going on here, and did we pick something that the challenge was too high compared to the skill level, or what else might be going on in the team, and then I'll pick something lower. If there's someone in the moment who says they don't want to take part of it, then I will ask them. I've asked people to just leave the room while we play the game if it's a very involved, very engaging game. But again, looking back, I've only had one person who said I don't want to take part in it. So it rarely happens because it's fun. People want to play. They just don't know it.
Okay, and that was the last question.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks again for playing along.
Thank you, Klaus. That was an excellent presentation. Looking forward to another one from you very soon.
Thank you.
Have yourself a great day, everyone.